Welcome to In My World. Today we've got Kavi going to be joining us as a guest, who's the local community engagement partner at the Fremantle Council. We're very excited to have you on board today. So tell us a little bit about yourself, Kavi.
Yeah, I'm a Fremantle local. I've been living here for about 10 years now, and I've been pretty active in the community for that amount of time as well. As a community organizer or volunteer, I'm pretty stuck into a lot of the local issues that are taking place. And then in my formal role, I work for the City of Fremantle as their community engagement partner, which is essentially leading their entire community engagement program. So I'll run, plan, design, report on all the kind of local issue things that happen where the public can give their feedback and contribute to decision making at the local government level.
Well, I've got a question for you then. Recently in Fremantle, there was a large tree on High Street that, for everyone that's listening, there's this huge fig tree, beautiful tree, that's been there for a very long time, and it drew up a lot of controversy in Fremantle community. Were you involved with helping manage that from the local government perspective?
Not necessarily. I definitely kept an eye on it. There's not much I can say on that, with the exception that what the public did get to see is a fascinating example of really local decision-making happening on a very local issue where, city officers made a recommendation for something, the councillors decided on something, the public felt that wasn't okay, and then they took to collective action to do something about it. And I play in that space to some extent. But I would say that's a fantastic example of where a lot of people from a lot of different backgrounds got together on something they cared about.
And so I've spoken to you before when I was actually walking to work one day, and you told me a little bit about your past, and you told me you did some work writing for Forbes. Is that correct?
So my main background is as a writer. One of the things that I always share with people is I didn't go to school beyond high school. At the age of 15, I pretty much knew that I wanted to try and get paid to be a writer in whatever way that would take, in any form. I come from an Indian family, and you have to kind of tell your parents that if you're going to do something wild like that, you got to plan to make it happen somehow. And I basically went on a journey where a lot of my contributions and my work in life are centered around, one, making sure I get to be a writer, I get to use my communication skills, but two, finding things that I like doing through those skill sets.
So what were you writing in Forbes?
A little bit of what you were doing. I was going around the world to different countries and working with different governments and companies to understand how their cultures influenced their workplace dynamics and their workplace cultures. At that time, at a very global level, remote work was really taking off. So this is long before COVID. And I really went around and got to see how different countries are navigating that shift of a digital workforce. To give you one example that might be relevant for a 20 Talk, in South Korea, I went and spent some time there exploring how the government was working with major technology companies to deal with youth suicide rates, a culture that's highly intense in their study and work. Failure is really not seen as something that's good, and it was really affecting their mental health rate to the point of quite drastic suicide rates. And so I went and explored and unpacked with these companies and the government what they were actually doing to try and stem that tide and change the narrative. And I got to write about it while doing it.
Wow, I actually have heard about that in South Korea. That's very fascinating.
Yeah, it's a very intense work culture over there, isn't it?
Insanely intense, yeah. I think we were talking about it on the walk down from the hill. Here if you fail, it's not great, but you can still, let's say, go back to the bank and get a new loan. You can seek funding. You can't try again. You can experiment. In certain cultures, that's just not an option. And it creates a huge dynamic of shame and, no ability to bounce back.
Yeah,
wow,
that's really stifle innovation as well, I can imagine.
Well, we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into you, Kavi, and just to see what some of your nuggets are that you have discovered from a mental health perspective over the last 12 months or so. We've got here reflect, which I am certainly interested about that one. Be honest with yourself and others. and have some fun. And depending on time, there may be a sneaky fourth one, but we'll see how we go.
He's pushing for a fourth, everyone.
So tell us about your reflection discovery.
This one goes back to my background as a writer.
Yeah.
If it's easier to make it even more tangible, I journal a lot. I've got mine right here in front of me for this conversation. But in reflection, it's about slowing things down.
Yeah.
Especially when you're in the heat of a moment. You kind of got all this anxiety or whatever pent-up issue that's coming up from the interaction you've had with someone or with something, and you want to take a moment to just stop and maybe feel through it.
Yeah.
One of the things I've learned in the past 12 months through going to therapy is naming the feeling. So when you're feeling something, name it. And I've worked really hard to figure out, instead of saying, Leighton, I feel that you're making me anxious, I instead say, I'm feeling anxious. And sometimes in a professional setting or in a personal setting, I've learned being able to reflect and then communicate that when it's appropriate to do so is so helpful, because at least it just states something in the room for that moment. We don't have to go any further. I can just say, I'm feeling anxious.
So you're saying, instead of Leighton, you're making me feel a certain way, you're saying I feel anxious. Is that to save it from going to too much externalization?
I think so, yeah.
To pull it back to yourself?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And then pulls it back to myself, slows it down.
Yeah.
Because then it might create a better opportunity if I'm writing it down or having it in my conversation, which will go into my number 2 point, to then create more of an environment for curiosity rather than just assumption.
Well, that's actually a really good segue that I think we should do a little bit of an exercise now, a little bonus exercise. What emotion are we all feeling right now? And we'll start with Steve, aka Dad.
Well, I'm feeling super interested because he's a writer, and I've always done a lot of journaling. I'm interested to hear about.
So you're feeling interested?
Yeah, that's how I feel.
Mm-hmm. Leighton?
Okay. Struck. I feel struck right now. I've got a lot of mixed emotions. Obviously, there's a lot of curiosity and a lot of excitement I have for this podcast, but also just recently getting some pretty heavy news right before the podcast as well. So it's this weird mash of
life,
purity, life and death.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's what I'm feeling right now.
And yourself?
I am feeling appreciative. I love being asked to converse and share ideas and learn from each other.
Yeah.
And I'm very appreciative of being here today.
Yeah. That's just a real bring us all to the present moment, isn't it? Like, that's a good example of how you can journal. Or it could be, I'm feeling just really angry. Or one of my lines in my journal I write is, I don't know why I'm writing this stupid journal today because I feel all over the place.
And really, you don't need to write something that's going to be
published.
Published experience. It's a paper and a pen, and you can just write your name if that's all you need to do as well.
I've got pages in this notebook and many other notebooks that it's just literally a sentence on one page and that's it. I've just left it there.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to just have it there. But sometimes, when we say I'm feeling struck and I'm writing it down in a journal, I'll then ask myself why, or what has happened so far, and I'll just start bullet pointing that out. And I think that's also a good thing for me. I don't have to write full structured sentences. I can just bullet it out.
Kavi, Leighton, I know you're a journaler as well. Does anyone here ever write 10 pages along, just put a question? Do you ever do that?
At the end? Or?
No, like halfway through your journal, like in, say, 50 pages, write a question for yourself in the future. Have you ever done that?
I've never done
that. Give it a go.
But I think I will try and do that.
It's good promo for our new 20 Talk Wellbeing journals with 250 self-reflection questions that'll be arriving in a week's time.
Well, this is a very big thing for 20 Talk because the self-reflection, most of the time you've only got yourself.
Yeah.
So if you can learn to have a good relationship with yourself and a good relationship with your mind and feeling, it's actually a very beneficial
I mean, it's
skill to do.
It really is everything.
Yep.
For me personally, it's everything. The depth and the relationship that you have, the tool set that you build, because you can always pick up all these little mental health tools and skills, but you can only get that through self-reflection.
I also like being able to go back and reread things and sometimes feeling quite surprised at how intelligent I was at that point in time, even though it felt like nothing. But you'll read things and you'll say, oh, God, that's embarrassing. And then you'll read things and say, I wrote that.
Yeah.
And I think because you're so in the thick of it, the micro, the macro, you zoom in, you zoom out. And it's just such a great way to go back and just see who you were. And that, that saying, if you don't cringe at who you were, then you haven't grown. But at the same time, you could be quite genuinely surprised about yourself.
So I'm actually a bit curious about your writing. So when you go to journal, would you typically say you head to the journal when you're in a negative space, or do you also head to the journal when you're in a positive? Because I know me personally, it's when I'm in a negative. But I'd be interested to know your perspective on that.
It's both for me.
Okay.
Yeah. If I'm feeling really good, if I've got something that I need to remind myself, on really good days, I'll sit down very quickly and just write down why it was a good day.
Yeah.
And then that's a good way for me to go back and say, if I'm not having a good day, what were some of those things that made that one a good day?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very good skill to learn, and I'm really glad that you've been able to shed a bit of light. And just that little exercise, is a classic example of how it can pull us back.
Well, so that brings us to our next topic, which is be honest with yourself and others. Do you want to talk to us about that?
This one's a really tough one. I'm someone that is very active in raising issues or having difficult conversations with people before they become too fraught. But that's also quite exhausting. And it's also learning to be diplomatic. It's learning to be regulated in your emotions. It's, again, in that reflection, in number one, naming the feeling, understanding what's happening there, and then building up the courage to have a conversation with either yourself, if it's the issue, or with the person that might have been unconsciously or intentionally creating an environment for that, situation to happen, that bad feeling to happen. And I do this quite regularly. I think it's because I'm 100% pure-blooded Aries. I did a test.
Yeah, okay.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
It was a very reputable online test.
Okay, very good.
That says that my sun, my moon, my sleeping, my whatever the hell it all is, it's all Aries. So I'm constantly about talking to people on those things. And it's super difficult because you got to be careful as well at the same time. But I think being honest with people more often and in probably very slighter ways rather than when that big moment comes and it's about to blow up, I've found it to be just much more effective.
Yeah, so
I'll leave that to you now.
Well, that's a difficult conversations question if you ask me.
Well, it's interesting when I talk with my training on difficult conversations in the corporate space, one of the things I talk about is before you decide you're going to have this difficult conversation is actually ask yourself the question, is it me with the issue or is it the other person?
Agree.
And because we too often jump into a situation that is it's a high risk activity, having a difficult conversation because you can come off second best. But to actually ask yourself, do I even need to go there? Because maybe I'm being given a gift by the other person, by them bumping up against me and saying, hey, Kavi, I didn't like how you treated me then, or this or that. And that maybe it's something with us. So sometimes we can cut off the need to have a difficult conversation and instead have one with ourselves.
Yep. The other one I wanted to add on that one is it's also difficult sometimes to just ask for help. And to just let people know that, in the first one that we're talking about, if you name the feeling and you're saying, I'm anxious, I might need X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
That in itself I found is quite hard but a very important thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, quite important to understand the risk of not bringing these things up early.
Yeah.
Because when you don't, it can be quite catastrophic for your relationships. for your business, for anything.
I read a study the other day that said that in America they did a big study on how conflict and affects the workplace, and they say that on average people spend 2.8 hours a week navigating conflict in the workplace. Because often, we can't talk to them because they're having a problem with them, or there's often a lot of these invisible walls because we struggle sometimes to have difficult conversations because it takes courage. There's a potential that you could come off with something that you weren't expecting to hear about yourself. Yeah. But it is essential skill that we have to learn, isn't it?
Totally. And I think it also speaks to that first reflect. We were talking quickly just about curiosity versus assumption. In those really difficult conversations, my goal is to go in and ask the who, what, when, where, how, and why, rather than why did you do that? Why are you being like that?
Yeah.
Just assuming on someone and that energy, but instead saying, how are you doing today? I'm getting the sense that you might be feeling like this. Can we check in about that? What is a much more, I think, relaxed approach to it? I'm not saying it's easy. I mean, I struggle with it all the time. Yeah. But leading with curiosity to understand versus just to assume has been incredibly helpful.
So
in the past 12 months, at least.
Where did that come from with you personally? Like, how did, obviously,
my therapist.
To me, it sounds like you're, but even to know that stuff, right? It's one to know how to handle those conversations, but the second thing is to actually be actively going into the world and using it. Yeah. And I think that's quite unique. So I'm curious to find out about, how did that sense of justice or that responsibility come into your life to a point where you go, hey, I'm going to start standing up for people. I'm going to start untangling these fishing lines around the place because I can.
That's a really good question. Yeah. Really good question. It must be in some ways associated to my interest and my ambition as a writer, as a journalist, to try and unpack those things. 2, it's my genuine, I think, love for community building and community problem solving. And with that comes a lot of diplomacy.
Yeah.
There is a political aspect to it. It's almost like being a politician without being a politician, but navigating so many different types of people from different walks of life with different, experiences and assumptions. And like we were saying, when we were just kind of chatting when we met, there are people that come to what I do with a lot of aggression, but it's not necessarily at me. It's about something that is associated to me. However, I'm the person that they'll be taking it out on.
That's right, because they think they pay their $2,000 a year rate so they can abuse anyone.
Yeah.
Which is very difficult for a frontline worker who often is powerless. So you have that's a very difficult role that
I'm also someone that doesn't like to overly experience the same challenges twice. So I immediately go to work trying to reduce the reality of that happening again.
That's wisdom, Kavi. That's good.
It's inevitable, right? I can't control everything. That's probably also an Aries trait. But I can reduce the nature in which some of those annoying things will happen and maybe just be a bit better set up for it. And I think in reflect, and be honest with others, that's room for me there to experiment with what that can be.
So changing the tact a little bit, your third one was have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I
love having fun.
Tell me what's having fun mean for you.
I have fun at parties.
I love having fun. Yeah, I think good.
And we're not allowed to talk about the journal because you've talked about that.
Yeah. For me, the fun is a recipe that has ingredients of rest, relaxation, doing things you love, trying new things, finding ways to also entertain yourself. And maybe in that same sense, like be bored sometimes, I guess, if you want to. There's the idea of having productive fun, maybe that you've started a new hobby or you're interested in something. But then there's also like the rotting fun, which is just eating junk food and watching TV, all within a boundary.
Yeah.
Because, there's a balance to all of those things. But I'm learning more and more because I'm so much on the spectrum of I want to have productive fun. Yeah. So many things that I want to do and so many different types of people that I want to meet and get to know what they're doing. But then there's also the it's okay to just sit and chill. And that's also regenerating who you are.
So how do you, I mean, you have, I would imagine, a very stressful front-facing job. How do you park that in yourself? How do you turn that off?
I'm still working on that. Is there like a 20 Talk podcast alumni session next year, and then I'll come back and you'll say, so what's happened? I'll be like, nothing. Everything's the same. That's a really good question. That's what I'm on the journey of right now.
Yeah.
It's so difficult because what I love and care about also happens to be my work, but my entire career has been that way.
Yeah.
Where I think I had said all the work I do is what I love doing. I've turned a lot of my hobbies into paying work.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that because I struggle still with the idea that I didn't go to school beyond high school, and in my culture, in my family, and just the journey that is, it's a lot of stuff. And so a lot of what I do has been things I love doing and I'm so interested in. This job that I have right now is a job that came out of just being interested in my community. But I'm still navigating that experience of when it's time to turn it off, what does that look like?
So what advice would you give for so a 19-year-old, one of our listeners who's 19, who has a lot of stress in their life at the moment? They don't know what they're doing career-wise. They've got problems at home, can't find a house. Like, how would you recommend somebody to try and find some peace? You're on the journey a little bit longer.
Yeah. I wrote down, make time to play.
Yeah.
And create if you can. Even if you don't know how to, make time to make something. Could be good food. Could be music. For me in particular, listening to music and eating good food is very important. If you can't do that, I wonder, I also wrote down for myself, find ways to create a comforting environment. And I know that in the example question you gave there, it could be all kinds of things, but I think I can definitely speak back to my 19-year-old self and remember the different ways that I tried to create that comforting environment. And for me, it came through at that time with going to gigs and being in a really terrible band and practicing. That was my comfort environment at that time.
It's actually interesting. I'm reading this book on teenagers at the moment and the emerging teenager brain. And if I can remember 4 of the fundamentals, which is the 4 fundamentals of, I guess, teenage development. These are the 4 areas that they need. One of them was intimate relationships. One of them was creativity. Another one was novel experiences. And the third one I forgot.
It sounds good anyway.
But practically, we did touch on both the novelty and the creativity. And I think what this book actually told us is as we get older, 25 plus, we start to, I guess, those things start to erode out of our life as we take on more responsibility, we take on more stress, and we start to push them in a way.
I wanted to add, I'm working on something right now. I'm working on a little magazine, a little zine that's going to be going out locally. And it explores the concept of how as we get older, we lose our ability to use imagination for possibilities and very much more easily get in the trap of cynicism and pessimism. And at 19, you're already being cajoled by so many different forces to let go of the things that make you playful, make you fun, make you imagine, make you try, give up, and then try again. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's like I'm trying to figure out and want to share back, how do you maintain that possibility rather than turning to pessimism? And for me, it's always been have fun and make something and be ready to fight for that every single day.
I actually just have had a wave of almost emotion come over me.
Yeah, you look like you're tearing up a little bit there.
This idea that you have about, create something fun or when you've got everything going in your life, you have to be intentional about creating a shade, like get under you're in the sun, you need to get into some shade. And I know for me, when I was quite young, is I would explore. I would explore in the bush, go for a drive, go on an adventure, go into the bush and just literally just step out of every bit of stuff that was going on in my life.
Would you say that's when you feel the most alive?
Yes, but it was an intentional stepping into this creating fun.
Yep.
Even though I would still go back to, living in a very chaotic family environment, I had the ability to make a choice to have some shade.
Yep.
And I think that's really refreshing and good to hear. And because we just get so busy. I mean, I'm struggling with the same thing myself. How do I step into that?
Or we make such a long list that we don't get started. And I would probably add to that, if you can just do one thing, just do one thing. Don't worry about trying to do 10.
Yeah.
Doing one thing is more than enough. And you're probably pretty exhausted after that.
Yeah.
My partner and I have been discussing a lot how we're a couple that can just do one thing.
Yeah.
And that's enough.
That's great. I mean, on Instagram and TikTok now, you got a million hobbies thrown at you in 10 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah. I think you have to be intentionally kind, and I guess it's intentionally. I think it was Banjo that we about loving yourself, intentional about that, and I think that was really worthwhile. I'm just looking at the time, and I think we I think we might actually have you come up with a
speed run.
I want to your fourth one. We've never had a fourth one, but you talked about bathe regularly. Now, come on, what's this one? And
bathe regularly.
You've got
if
2
you
minutes.
Can. Yeah. I love being clean. I love taking a shower. It's the best thing ever. Being clean, I think, makes you feel better too.
Yeah.
Because then you're not really bogged down by something. You can create a comforting environment in your shower, in your bathtub if you have one. You could read. You can listen to music. You can put incense on. You can do whatever.
Yeah.
Just chill. And also being clean regularly makes you not only feel better about yourself, but people notice that about you because you smell good, you feel good, you look good.
So that's just a good little well-being tip, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a couple of moments of...
I took a shower before I came here, right before I came here.
I was wondering why I smelled
Nobody noticed.
Our last guest actually had a really nice perfume on.
So you obviously don't work for the Water Authority.
Did you have the dream of mine though? One day. The Water Corporation. They do some amazing engagement work.
Yeah, they do. They do.
Really
Sponsored by the Water Corporation. But yeah, one thing I do notice actually is when you have a clean room, clean sheets, you wake up in the morning, it's Sunday, you feel 10 times better. You do.
I do. I rejected all of that growing up. It took me until becoming an adult to make it reality.
Yeah.
So if you're listening right now,
clean
chuck
your room.
Sheets in the washing machine, chuck a fresh pair on, and thank us later.
Have a good shower. Go into the bush.
Do your homework.
And write about it when you get home. Look, Kavi, that's been really refreshing, man. And I love what you do and what you do in the community. That'd be a really tough job. And I'm glad there's people like you who are passionate about making our community good.
That's not common, so
thank you.
You should be proud of yourself for that, mate.
Thanks. So thank you. It's well worthwhile.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening, everybody.